18th of May 1968, Mr. J. Krishnamurti's third public talk in Amsterdam at the Congress Center.
When we last met here, we were considering the question of thought and how it divides, how it fragments, brings about fragmentation in life. If I may, I would like to go this morning into the question of thought in relationship between man and man. What place has thought? We have, as one observes right through the world, brought about fragmentation in life. We are businessmen, something different from family life. The religious people are different from the scientific crowd. The socialist is different from the communist. The individual is opposed to the community, or the community opposed to various forms of nationalities. So as one observes throughout the world, there is this fragmentation going on, both outwardly and inwardly. And where there is a fragmentation, there must be opposition, resistance. One is aware of that. And seeing this fragmentation, one wonders if it is at all possible to bring about so-called integration. Whether there is such thing as integration at all, or that is entirely a false idea. You can't put black and white together and integrate it. It will produce some other color. So there must be, mustn't there, an action that cannot be ever fragmented, broken up as political, religious, family, individual, community, and so on. And it seems to me that's very important to find this out, whether it is at all possible to act so totally, so completely, that the religious life is not in opposition to the family, to the business life. That one particular course of action is not opposed to another. That when one considers, as so many do, that given the economic, social, right environment, everything will come right. That's all a matter of political arrangement. And then man will live everlastingly happily after that. So life is broken up into many fragments. One can observe it in oneself. I hate and love. One wants to be good, and there is always this tension against temptation, evil, and so on. And when one asks oneself whether it is at all possible for an action that is never broken up, it's always complete, it's always non-fragmentary. And if we may, this morning we're going to find out, not intellectually, not ideationally, as an idea or as a theory, but actually find out for oneself in daily life, in whatever one is doing, whether it is possible to act so completely, so wholly, so that there is no fragmentation whatsoever. To go into this question fully, one has to understand, it seems to me, the question of pleasure. And the discipline that entails in all living. For most of us, pleasure is the guide to almost everything. We give up one pleasure for greater pleasure, for one greater satisfaction, the minor satisfaction, and so on. And each pleasure, each gratification brings its own discipline. Either that discipline conforming to a pattern set by the previous pleasure, previous remembrance of an experience which molds the activity of thought. And as one observes, most of us, probably 99.9%, act according to the dictates of pleasure. And that pleasure takes the form of morality, righteousness, virtue, and ideal, and so on. And is there not a fragmentation when pleasure is the principle of life? Because pleasure inevitably must breed fear. One can say very simply and very clearly how pleasure operates. An experience of great delight of an yesterday, remembered, and the demand for its continuance, and the fear that it may not continue. And there already has begun fragmentation of life. Not that we are opposed to pleasure. That would be absurd. But we have to understand the nature and the structure of pleasure. And it's really very important. Because pleasure does bring about this breaking up of life as the religious life and the social life and so on, so on, so on. And we are not opposed to it. Because when you see a leaf fluttering in the wind, and there is a great deal of wind in Holland, you see the beauty of that leaf in the wind, rejoicing, dancing. That is a great delight, a great pleasure. When you see a sunset full of light and glory, there is an enjoyment. Oh, when you see a beautiful flower, a face, you cannot deny or suppress or transmute that pleasure. It is there. One has to accept it. As one accepts the blue sky, the green earth, the desert and the mountain. But when it becomes the dominating demand of life, as it is with most of us, an insistent, conscious or unconscious demand, then in that there is this constant breaking up of life into compartments, into fragmentation, to divisions. And in asking, what is pleasure? One also has to ask, what is love? What is the place of pleasure in relationship, in human relationship? And is pleasure love? And for most of us, unless we indulge in absurd ideologies which are always idiotic and theories which have no meaning whatsoever, for most of us, love is pleasure. And one has to go into this question fairly deeply to find out whether a relationship between human beings, what it is, actually, what place has thought in relationship, and is relationship based on pleasure, or is relationship between human beings the outcome of love, affection? This is what we are, if we may, going to talk over together. That is, we're going to commune together. Because verbal explanation may bring about a certain quality of communication. One must use words to communicate. But words in themselves have no reality. They are a means of telling each other what we feel, what we think, what we understand, what we perceive. But if we could establish a relationship, not of words, but so that we can commune with each other at a different level altogether, not at the verbal level. The words must be used. This communion in discussing a very complex problem like relationship and all the things involved in it, is not a mental process. It's not something you understand intellectually and gather a few ideas and think that you have understood. On the contrary, to understand any complex human problem, one must be completely in communion with it. That is, one must give one's mind and one's heart to the understanding of this question. Therefore, one has to listen with a great deal of attention, care and affection. Not merely live at an intellectual level. Then all communication and all communion comes to an end. So, we are going to talk over this together, very seriously, not casually, not listening to a speaker, to a lot of words and ideas, or giving importance to the speaker, which is all too absurd and infantile. But if we could, this morning, go into this question of relationship, and perhaps then we shall come upon that action, which is always total, whatever you are doing. Whether going to the office, working in a factory, cooking, washing dishes, or digging in a garden, milking a cow, holding the hand of another. Or when you look at a tree or a cloud, the beauty of a bird, it's all one action stemming from one source. So, in inquiring, examining into this question of relationship, one must also ask, what place has thought in relationship? Thought being the response or the reaction to the memory, knowledge, experience, which is the past. What place has relationship, the past, in relationship? If in that relationship, in human relationship, the past controls all action in relationship, as it does with most people, then is it relationship at all? Relationship, surely, is the whole movement of life between people. Movement, not a static state which is remembered and from that remembrance acting. Is this all a little bit too much? Too verbal? Let's put it differently, if we may. Relationship means to be related, to be in contact, to touch, to feel, to see what the other human being is, to be intimately in contact with the other. The other may be person, an idea, a propagandist ideology. To be related implies that. That is, to be related always in the present. Otherwise, you're not related. Unless you are in constant contact with the reality of a human being. With all his peculiarities and so on, unless one is completely in contact in the present, there is no relationship at all. Is there? If I am related to you, and my relationship is the remembrance of 1,000 yesterdays, which has built an image, and according to that image I act, or according to that image I am related to you, is that relationship. And you have an image about me, a symbol, an idea. And according to that image, idea, symbol, you act in this relationship with me. So you are acting according to a remembrance of things past, pleasurable or painful, and I am also doing the same. We are living in the past. An action springing from the past is what we call generally a relationship. And we are saying, we are questioning this whole thing altogether. You know, it is very important to question everything, to doubt everything everybody says, including the speaker, especially the speaker, because you are so easily influenced, especially when they come from the East. You think they have got a mysterious philosophy, mysterious mission with an extraordinary oriental mysticism, all that childish rubbish. It has no validity whatsoever. That only breeds authority and superstition and hero worship, which have no place whatsoever in understanding what truth is. And that's what we are trying to do, to find out for ourselves, not through somebody else, not through some guru, some teacher, find out for ourselves absolutely what is truth. Not an abstract truth, but truth of life, truth in everyday living. So that one is tremendously honest with oneself. So, do not please accept what the speaker is saying. But use the speaker as a mirror in which you see yourself as you are. That may be rather frightening. But one has to see in order to find what is true, not according to some opinion, not according to an experience of another, or the theory of another, but actually what you see yourself in that mirror. And when we are discussing this question of relationship, which is tremendously important, because all life is relationship. Life ceases when you have no relationship. Like a monk who withdraws into solitary cave or a room or whatever it is they do. He is still related, though he may pretend not to be related. He may be related to an idea, a concept, a formula, but he is still related. And to be related means to be active in the present. Otherwise there is no relationship. And for most of us, relationship means a remembrance of some pleasure or pain which has been accumulated in relationship with another. Between the husband and the wife, between the children, and so on. So all our relationship, if one observes, is based on this image. And the image is the past. Adding to it or taking away from it, but always the core of it is the past. You can see very easily for oneself how this image is built. One hasn't got to go into it. It's fairly obvious. The mechanism of it, the thought, thinking over, the insult, the domination, the pleasure, the sexual demand and appetite and its fulfillment, and all the rest of it. Thought has gradually built it up as pleasure and pain. And that is the core of all our relationship. Whether it be between individuals, between man and woman, between the individual and the community with the nation, and so on with the world and cosmos and all that. So, when we are examining this question of relationship, one has naturally to understand the whole process of thinking has love any relationship in the sense that we have accepted which is, what is the place of thought in love? Or, where there is thought, there is no love at all. And what place has pleasure in relationship? Whether it be sexual pleasure or pleasure of companionship or pleasure in being together, living together, and all the problems involved in that. Do please observe it in yourself. Don't merely listen to me. Because if love is pleasure, then when that pleasure is thwarted, there is pain, there is jealousy, there is hatred, there is anger. And can jealousy exist when there is love? And yet that's what we do. That's what we have. We say, well, I love you. And with it comes all the agony, the fear, the anxiety, the domination, the possession, being possessed, giving in which there is pleasure, and possessing also is a form of pleasure. All this exists in what one calls love. And if there is no love, then what is relationship? And we have no love, obviously. If there is love, we would have a totally different kind of education. We wouldn't destroy our children. And we don't love, obviously. So one has to go into this question of pleasure. And therefore, in inquiring into the question of pleasure, there also the question of pain and fear. And pleasure is sustained and nourished by thought, which is fairly simple to see for oneself. Remembrance of a pleasurable incident, thought giving it a continuity to today, and looking forward to it tomorrow. And in this process, the fear of not having it tomorrow and wanting it guaranteed. So, thought has an immense importance in our life in relationship. And thought breeds envy, comparison, jealousy. And when thought breeds these things, we are not related at all. When each human being lives in his own isolation, in his own self-centered activity, though he may be married, have children, sex and all the rest of it, he's still living isolated. And when there is isolation, how can there be relationship at all? So, when one sees that actually, not theoretically, either you accept it as it is, accept it, cherish it, polish it up, give it a tremendous significance to it when it has none whatsoever. Or you completely deny the whole structure of it. Deny this whole tradition of relationship, which inevitably breeds such hatred, such jealousy, such antagonism. And then one has to ask also, why is there in this relationship so much sorrow? Why are human beings right through the world, from the most backward village to the most highly sophisticated town, why does human heart carry this burden of sorrow? Can sorrow ever end? This is a very important question to ask. Not get used to sorrow. That's what most of us do. Put up with it, accept it, or worship it, as the Christians do. In the church, symbolized. But one never asks why this sorrow exists. Not only the individual sorrow, but the sorrow of man, sorrow of humanity, the sorrow of the world. The man who has very little to eat, no shelter, oppressed, he is in great sorrow. And the oppressor also is in great sorrow. The man at the altar is in sorrow as well as the businessman. Every human being has this enormous burden of sorrow. And we have accepted it as part of our existence. And when you accept anything, whether it's the most beautiful thing which you see in a picture, or the curve of the line of the mountain, or the flowering tree, when you accept it and get used to it, your mind and heart becomes dull, stupid. And in that there is no innocence. So is it possible to end sorrow? As a human being living in this world, living with a family, with children, living in loneliness, despair, anxiety, guilt-ridden, and so on. Which are all bring sorrow. Is it possible to be free of it? Which means, is it possible to analyze the whole business of sorrow? How it comes, from what source it springs, how it has continuity in our life, darkening our eyes, our heart, our speech, our outlook. Must one analyze it, step by step, examine it, discover the cause. And when you do discover the cause, by understanding the cause, does sorrow end? Apparently it doesn't, never has. So there must be a different approach to the ending of sorrow. And to understand this sorrow, the sorrow that love brings, the sorrow when you are not loved by the one whom you want to love, the sorrow in your own heart. Can all that come to an end? So that we are human beings living in delight, in beauty, in happiness, in truth. And this is not something mysterious out of that dark east. It's a human problem. First of all, to end it, one must understand the nature of time. Because we accept time as a way of overcoming things, of resolving things. There is sorrow, and we say gradually, through process of time, we will somehow put it away from us. Does sorrow end through time, psychological time, and also by the chronological time? By the chronological time, one may get used to it. Gradually, day after day, put up with it. And psychologically, inwardly, we say to ourselves, I'll get rid of it slowly. Or try to forget it, rationalize it, escape from it. Surely, there is only one way to end sorrow. Not through analysis, not through escape, not through rationalization, but to meet it, to look at it, to be in complete communion with it, to be utterly related to it. Do please listen to this. You know, when you look at a tree, you will never look at it except with the image you have of that tree, the botanical knowledge of that tree. Your eyes see through the image of knowledge, of remembrance or of pleasure. But you never look at it without the image, without thought, merely to look. And I'm sure you never looked at your wife or husband. Looked in the sense without the image that you have about her or about him. And when you look at the cloud or the bird or the light on the water without the image, then you are directly in contact with it. You have no space between you and the thing that is observed. Do it sometime, you'll see it for yourself. The time interval between the observer and the thing observed, the distance, the space, undergoes a tremendous change. In the same way, to look at sorrow without avoiding it, without naming it, without cherishing it, but to look at it, to be completely in contact with it. And you can only be in contact with it when you give complete attention to it, care. And you cannot give attention to it completely unless your mind is quiet. Then you will say, when there is no resistance to sorrow, sorrow undergoes a total change. Which doesn't mean you accept sorrow. It doesn't mean that you identify yourself with that sorrow. You are the sorrow. There's not you and sorrow. The observer, the thinker is the thought. And when you realize that tremendously, not as an idea but an actuality, something that you feel, touch, see, then you will find, like fear, as fear ends when you come directly into contact with it, so sorrow comes to an end. And also, we have to find out for our souls what is love. You know, they talk so much about it. How that word has been spoilt by the politician, by the theoretician, by the priest, by the husband, by the wife, how human beings have destroyed, spoilt that lovely word. It is heavily loaded. and to find out what it means. Not intellectually. To come upon it, one has to not to do anything about it. You understand? If you do anything about it, it's the action of thought. And thought is old. And where thought operates, it's always operating in the field of the known. And it is only in the freedom from the known there is innocence, which is love. Do you understand? You may learn this phrase, but the word is not the actuality. Which means really, to love there must be no fear, no sorrow. It's not the love of one or the many. Just to love. And that comes about only when you understand the whole activity of the self, of the me, with all its contrivances, cunningness, and its absurdities. When you actually come into contact with the absurdity of thought. Thought has its place technologically. Unless you know where you are going, you won't be able to get to your house. You have to know. But if thought is the product, if love is the product of thought, then there is in it pain. In it then there is hate, envy, division. So, really, to love means to die. Doesn't it? To die to everything that you have known as the me. And one doesn't want to die in that sense. We're all much too egotistical, much too self-centered, with our opinions and judgments, with our country, gods and beliefs and God knows what else. And if one could completely set aside all that, not through will, not through determination, but merely to see it very clearly, with eyes that have never been touched by the past, so that you see it totally anew. That is to see the self, the me, with eyes that are innocent. And that's one of our problems. that we are all very old. Not in perhaps not in body, but we're very old traditionally, deeply, historically. And being very old, we are not innocent. And innocency is not of time. It's the ending of the yesterday. And when the yesterday ends, there is love in relationship.